Yep.
Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Gary Mitch Spez22.com, Podbean podcast, YouTube video. People will notice I am beardless and my head is shaved. And whenever,
Seen
yeah,
that.
I always say my beard has the Platonic exitus raditus schema where it just goes out and then it comes back because I can't, I'm the most horrible beard trimmer on the face here. So I start to trim the beard and then realize, oh, the heck with it, and just shave it off.
Just shave it
Off it
off.
comes. And then, so my daughter often says that when I do the full shave, head and beard, I look like a praying mantis. I look like a bug. So,
Well,
so
where would we be without our daughters to tell us what's really going on? So,
that's right. Hey, Dad, I see you've got your praying mantis look going.
yeah.
So, yeah, yeah. So, but the beard shall be back. Anyway, welcome to two guests. We just, two guests who've been on here before. Mike Hanby of the JP2 Institute out of Washington, D.C. I just did a podcast with Hanby and Hauser last week, discussing Michael's article in Communio on education. We then moved into AI. And then after that conversation, uh, I was doing an email exchange with Mike, and he said something about how he had met my friend Kale Zelden up in Providence uh, at a conference up there. And I thought, well, it's high time we got Kale and Mike together on a single podcast. So today's podcast is going to be a grab bag conversation, just kind of an excuse to get Kale Zelden and Mike Hanby together on the podcast to riff on some topics. Uh, Gosh, I had something else in my head I was going to say, but now it's sort of escaped me. Oh, um, I just hope that uh, I just hope that the windstorm that is currently blowing through Scranton doesn't destroy my internet. Anyway, welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Larry. Great to see you, Mike.
Yeah, great to see you, Kale. I've been looking forward to this. This should be a lot of fun.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. Uh, I was very much looking forward to it. The ostensible topic here, we want to get the ball rolling, is something we started talking about at the end of my podcast with Rodney and Kale. We began last time talking about education. We ended up talking about artificial intelligence. But I want to begin with AI today, and then we're going to probably move into some current events, that kind of thing later on. But I want to start talking about AI. So I'm going to actually, even though Mike Hanby is the guy who's given all these talks on AI and all that kind of stuff, I'm actually going to start with Kale today.
I'm
Because
going
I've
to
never,
recommend that.
okay, because I've never actually heard Kale's take on AI, and I know Kale probably has a take on AI. So let's start with your take on artificial intelligence, Kale, and then we'll move on from there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I can, we could probably come at this question from a variety of different angles, and probably all of them are important on some level. I, of course, I'm a teacher, and so one of my primary concerns is probably clustered around that broad topic. Um, you know, I am, sort of concerned about it generally, of course, but I'm, you know, very quickly when this hit the news about 2 years ago. So I think it was around two Decembers ago. If it really when they released the first Chat GPT model, and it became apparent right away that what we have conventionally required our students to engage in, sort of the process of writing a paper, taking topics that we talk about in class and we read about in class, and taking that topic and generating some kind of essay at the end of a unit or a book or a semester, that was certainly a concern, and that the chatbots could reasonably put together an essay that certainly matches or exceeds most of what I would get at the end of a book, at the end of a unit, at the end of a semester. And so that was certainly a concern. And, in other words, that if a bot could do at or beyond what I'm asking my students to do, then we probably should think a little bit more deeply about the nature of that assignment and what we've been doing for my entire professional career in the high school classroom. And I'm sure, Michael, you could probably speak to that as well. But it became very obvious to me after that initial. In full disclosure, I have I've long been a skeptic of the kind of classic 5-page paper, because I'm not so sure that it has any kind of bearing with actual human sense making. But I'll put that aside, because now we have a technology that can again reasonably imitate that process. But what I became much more concerned about and remain more concerned about is not so much that it can generate a fake paper. Michael, we've been in this business of grading student work for a really long time, ever since the internet, popped on the scene in the late 90s. You could always get a bad paper online. You could pay for it really quickly, very easily. Now it's just a little bit easier to do it. It's free, essentially. But whenever anything is free, of course, you have to be properly suspicious about costs, buried costs, and so there's that. But then, what is even more troubling to me from an educational standpoint regarding the chatbots, ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, etc., is that it actually functions as a crutch by which students are no longer required to think. And if the essay was in an attempt on the likes of teachers like us to get our students to think, well, it doesn't do that anymore. And so therefore the outsourcing of the very difficult work of actually thinking is my deeper concern about AI in the classroom, because generating a reasonable summary of a work allows me to superficially complete the task, even if I have to go into an in-class essay where, we give a prompt and, a day before and they walk into the classroom to do it. Well, you can very much use ChatGPT or Claude or Grok to do all the thinking for you. And so therefore you can kind of even skip that step, come into the classroom and throw together a reasonable and kind of logically set up essay and do the work. And so therefore, what is even that accomplishing? And so my concerns then are that not only does it allow you to create an essay, but it also allows you to skip the deeply human step of learning how to make sense, learning how to think. And, we can get into questions about, artificial intelligence generally, and certainly artificial general intelligence. And that question, we could have that conversation. But from a classroom standpoint, this is a DEFCON 5 situation, as far as I can tell, that we are in a situation where students can even outsource a thing that.
Oh, we lost Kale there. Kale, when you get a chance, come back. But anyway, Mike, now that it's just you and me.
Well, he's right about everything,
Yeah.
for sure. And I'm sorry that he disappeared, because the first thing I wanted to ask him, as one who assigns a number, quite a
Oh, now we've got Kale's back, and we've got a beautiful picture of his keyboard.
Hold on one second. Can you hear me? All right, there we go.
Oh,
Sorry.
there he is. There he
All right.
is. All right. Yeah. Well, you went to adjust something, and you must have pulled a cord
I
out.
did, yeah. Don't touch anything, right?
But anyway, and it looks like Hanby is now frozen. So, like I said, we're having internet issues here on the East Coast. So hopefully Hanby will come back.
God, I think he was trying to ask me a question, Larry. Do you remember what he was saying?
No, because as soon as he started to ask the question, he kind of froze up. And
all right, well, we'll go back to him. He'll pop up here in a second.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll come back. So I want to I want to come back at you with just a oh here maybe he's backed out, so maybe he'll come back, but I'll
Yeah.
quickly say this. How I know this is different. It's a kind of a rhetorical question, but I want to bring this up because people might be thinking about it. How is what you're talking about, the dynamic that you're talking about in the classroom with Chat GPT and so forth, different from when, say, I was in advanced math class in the early 70s in middle
Mhm.
school
Mhm.
and learning algebra and then geometry and then calculus. And Texas Instruments had just come out with their fancy calculator. We had been using slide rules, and
Yeah.
now you could do sine, cosine, tangent, and a few other algebraic things on a
Mhm.
Texas Instrument calculator. And so
Mhm.
the big debate was, well, we shouldn't allow our students to use calculators because they'll become used to using them and they
Mhm.
won't be able to figure things out in their head on their own. To
Mhm.
which the rejoinder was, of course, well, the slide rule is also a tool of some kind. So how is this different than that? In other words, doesn't technology always move forward? Isn't Chat GPT just a tool that we use?
Yeah, that's a fair pushback. Talk to a math teacher though. If you talk to a math teacher, you know that the buried costs of outsourcing math facts, for instance, to the calculator, um, has absolutely retarded the capacity for most
Yeah,
students to do mathematics. Now, for your upper echelon, top tier math students, you know, that's not an issue, right?
right.
That moving from a slide rule, which does require you to sort of understand ratios and
It
slides, and
does.
there's a sort of a physical component to that process that I think still kept it in the realm of the extension of the thinker,
It's
right?
almost as if using a slide rule was analog and not digital.
I think so. That's exactly right. And even if you look at a slide rule, and it's got the sort of three moving parts, and you kind of moving things
Yeah.
around, it is analog in a conceptual way that it's not just me hitting a couple of buttons and hitting a return button and then something spits out. There's something to be said. There's something to be said for having to physically kind of move those things around and to be kind of it sort of expands in your visual horizon in such a way that it is deeply a physical process, right? And I think that there is an analog here in terms of that, not to use your version of analog,
Yeah,
but there's an
yeah, I know what you mean.
analogy. There's an analogy here with, using Chat GPT for, philosophy, history, English, theology, that sort of thing. So
Right,
I
right.
think that if you ask an old timer math teacher right now, they will all tell you that the capacity of their math students, and I'm talking here about that fat middle class, so to speak, their capacities to do mathematics has been absolutely retarded in terms of their formation
Right,
into
right.
deeper math thinkers. So I don't. So I take your point. I take your pushback, but I don't think we've even really reckoned with the calculator either.
Yeah. So it wasn't so much pushback as raising an issue I think some will ask. Mike,
Yeah.
while you were gone, I'm glad, by the way, welcome back. While you were gone, I was asking him how is using Chat GPT any different than the complaints in the early 70s when I was learning algebra from math teachers saying, don't use your Texas Instruments calculator to do sine, cosine, tangent, use your slide rule. And in other words, isn't Chat GPT just a tool that we now have to learn how to use? But I'm an old fan of Marshall McLuhan. The medium is
Yeah.
the message,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if there's nothing gets under my skin more than the stupid argument. Well, it's just a tool. It's neutral. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You got to use. Anyway, go ahead, Mike. You had a question
Well,
right before we lost you.
yes, as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted. Um, actually, I don't recall what I was saying, but I'll just jump in on the point that
Yeah.
you're addressing now. At some point, um, differences in degree become so great that they become
Mm.
differences in kind.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And I I also tire of it's not an argument so much as something that we say when our brains are on autopilot. And it's also something that we say because it allows us to remain optimistic or hopeful, or to think that this really isn't so bad and we don't have to come face to face with what it really means. But I also tire of a tool argument, and
Oh,
or
yeah, it's an absolute spell. I always characterize it as a kind of spell, or a charm, that hides, buries, real things, right? That we sort of have been charmed into this kind of costlessness myth, right? It's just, we're spellbound by it, as if it's sort of, well, I can sort of define it and dismiss it, and now I don't have to really worry about it. Well, again, any veteran educator will tell you that there are all kinds of buried costs in that. And as you said, it's one of those things you can say to kind of make you feel better, but it doesn't make it not true.
right, and it creates the false picture. I mean, what's so pernicious about the tool language is that it creates the false picture that this is a thing, this is an instrument at our disposal,
Yeah.
subject to our control. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been referring to it lately as kind of the Boromir paradigm,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
idea that
Yeah.
this is a great power, but it's merely instrumental to our purposes, and if we're moral enough and our ends are noble, we can use it well, and
Yes.
that conceals the deep ways, and ever deeper and ever more extensive ways in which we are both, as you were describing, evacuated by this thing. I mean, and the thing about this technology is it's not just a tool that you pick up when you choose. It runs out to meet you,
Mm-hmm.
right, at every turn now.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to, if you just search something,
Yeah.
or you want to interface with your bank, or whatever the case may be, at every turn, this technology is running out to meet you, to anticipate you, to offer to relieve the burden of the most mundane of cognitive tasks, which we tend to dismiss as kind of mental rote work or mental mechanical work, but they are these tasks. I mean, the capacity to think in propositions strung together in some kind of coherent way is fairly foundational to every higher level thing one might want to do.
Right.
Well, so not only does it conceal the way in which we're completely likely to be evacuated of our inner substance by offloading these operations, but it also conceals the fact that we're not, in fact, in control. We're not, in fact, governing these things and employing to our purposes. We are increasingly at their service, and have to conform to what they can do, what they can't do, et cetera. And so what's so pernicious about the tool language, I think, is that it simply hides the truth from us.
Yeah.
If I could say one last thing, that was all just a preface to what I was going to say, and I'll keep this very short, which is that on this question, as tired as I am of the idea that this is merely a tool, I'm just as tired of the idea, and I think you alluded to it, Larry. Well, this is just a calculator on steroids, right? In other words, that there are no differences in kind, but only differences in degree. And you'll see this, there's some stupid books out there that sort of take this back to the discovery of the wheel, or the harnessing of fire. And this is another way of actually absolving yourself of having to think about this, and what it means, and the novelty of it, and what its consequences are likely to be.
I know. I mean, I love what you just said, Mike, where you said, the AI actually runs out to meet you. The past few times I've logged on to Zoom to start these podcasts now, I'm getting this pop-up message saying, "Hey, AI companion is now here to help you." And do you want AI companion to help you? And I click no, because I already have a companion, my wife. I look at the language even. It's my companion. I almost feel like if I say no, the voice of Hal will come over. I'm very sorry to hear that, Larry. I can't do that, Larry. I'm very sorry, Larry. And it's like, wow, it's taking over. But I thought, And the other day I was calling to make a doctor's appointment, and I got, of course, the computerized list of 27 numbers to push, and the computer voice said, what can I help you with today? And I said, I want to talk to a human being.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. So I said back to
No,
it.
no, you do not understand that, chat. No, you do not.
I said, F you. You understand perfectly well, you piece of blankety blank. Now I want to talk to a human being. Click.
Yeah.
It hung up.
Yeah.
It hung up.
You offended it.
I offended the companion.
Yeah.
Now that probably wasn't AI, but it's
well, no, it's a version of it. It's certainly a version of it.
And it's like I was going into a parking garage the other day at an airport, and the machine said, please take a ticket. My wife was with me. And I screamed at the machine and said, don't tell me what to do. And my wife, Carrie, started laughing hysterically as she goes, is there anything you don't yell at? Which reminds me,
whatsoever. Thank you there.
I was giving up trying to lose weight. So I said to a friend of mine, maybe I'll just be fat and jolly. He goes, well, maybe you need to work on the jolly
part. Hey, you can only do, there's no such thing as multitasking, Larry, right? One thing at a time. One thing at a time. I mean, come on.
Concentrate on the fact.
Anyway, that's a
well, look, I do think it's worth leaning into this whole tool language thing that Mike brings up here, because there really is one must make a distinction between technology as an extension of the human person, and I mean that physically, versus technology that again, I'm going to use that word, and I'm not trying to be provocative, but retards the fulfillment of the human person, right? Like a screw or a lever or a pulley, those sort of the seven classic, basic machines. What we're talking about here is it's a substitutionary model of what humans do. And, it's very pernicious. It slides right in, as you're saying. And it's like, okay, let's just say as a thought experiment that I say, okay, I'm going to give you Aristotle's ethics. Okay. People have been reading Aristotle's ethics for, a couple of thousand years, right? And, do I really need to know my 11th graders' take on the ethics, right? In other words, there's a shot that my 11th grader is going to see something in the ethics that is kind of novel and new and whatnot. But, likely not. But that's not what I'm doing with that assignment. I'm not creating an expert in my intro to ethics course, maybe as a college freshman or whatever, right? That's not what I'm doing. That's not why I'm having my student go through that process. What we're doing is we're actually forming human beings. And if that formation doesn't take place on that kind of foundational level, it doesn't matter how much I can play around with an algorithm and spit out certain things. I've just become an extension of the chip, as opposed to a fulfillment of my destiny as a human being. And that is what is so important, right? It's like when people say to me, like, well, why do you waste your 10th graders' time on Dante's Inferno? They're not going to get it anyway. And, it's like, because I'm not trying to create an expert in Dante's Inferno. That's not what we're doing here. This is not pre-professional training. It's human training. Like, in other words, I'm trying to use Dante, if you will, as a way to sort of begin to elicit out of this blob a more full version of that not yet formed human being.
Yeah, and this goes right to the heart of what learning is, what learning and education are, right? It is an inner transformation of the learner.
Yeah.
To learn is to effect a change, not in the subject matter, but in the one whose mind and habits and dispositions and attention are all conformed to the discipline of coming to some kind of an understanding if not even wholly of this, just in the capacity to understand.
Right. Right.
And the what's part of what's pernicious about I think the technologization of education in general,
Mm-hmm.
and then this steroidal expression of that
Mm-hmm.
is, on the one hand, it denies that that's what education is effectively
Yeah.
by reducing it to a kind of data processing.
That's right.
Therefore, the most efficient way of data processing is the best way to do it. And yet, because that kind of transformation is what education really is, and not something we have to choose about, what we are in fact doing is forming people in the image of, or to become users of, this technology. So that process of hollowing out that we were describing before is the formation.
Yeah.
It's the very opposite of education, in fact. And there are all kinds of ways, as you know, as well or better than I. There are all kinds of ways in which what we call education is radically misnamed, right? And in fact affects almost the opposite.
Right.
More fragmented, more confused, shallower people than they might have been left to their own devices.
That's right.
Oftentimes, and if anyone gets an education, it's kind of an accident.
Right.
In most instances, but this will systematize the accidental quality and make the hollowing much greater. And my concerns, you began the conversation by saying, you were principally concerned with the question of education. I think that is the fundamental place at which to begin thinking about this, because we are talking about the process of human formation and soul craft, in effect.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But you can extrapolate from the classroom to every field the same problem very quickly, right? I mean, what happens to the future of medical competence when doctors or pilots or people in any field, or for that matter, simply people trying to go on about the business of their life, needing to think about and make sense of the world they're in. Right. When we've all been, in a sense, conditioned by our immersion in this technology that has run out to meet us and has rapidly adjusted the rhythms of our lives and the ways in which both the form and content of our so-called thinking.
Right. And I think that's, again, let's steer back into that again. I think you're right. That this is why, if we talk about the crisis of education, I think we also have to talk about the crisis of Catholic education. This is why, if you have a faulty anthropology, you cannot throw together, design a formative process and experience that will achieve the best good or the proper good. And so questions of education, questions of AI are essentially questions about anthropology. Who am I, and where did I come from, and what am I supposed to do, right? And I'm reminded in listening to you, Mike, is the purpose of the system is what it does. And so let's take a look at that. Like, what does the system do? Well, if all it took was a chat bot to derail an entire educational process, then we have to ask the question, this is not an aberration so much as this is the fruition of a faulty anthropology that leads us to concoct a system to create cogs, not human beings. And the very easy distinction that one can make, right, is the difference between formation and what would you say? Not so much formation, but training, right? Yeah. In that. Look, there's obviously a place for training. I don't think any of us would say, oh well, anything that has sort of the smack, the flavor of training is like bad. No, I don't think any of us would say something like that. But you can train a seal, right? And so therefore, are we in essence using the machine in this kind of that King's Northian way? Are we using the machine as a way of backwards engineering human beings to be less human so that they can more properly and not raise so much trouble in a kind of institution ordered toward the building out of a bigger and better and faster and more efficient machine.
I think
Yeah,
that's
I
a good
wholly
point.
agree
That's
with.
what Mike in his article in Communio referred to that as conditioning, that
That's
we're
right.
being conditioned.
Yeah.
Go
And
ahead,
this is
Mike.
Yeah,
like
I
Lewis.
didn't coin the term, obviously. I mean,
Yeah.
you got
Yeah.
it all the way back in Huxley and Lewis
Yeah. That's right.
probably earlier.
Yeah.
No, I wholly agree with this. In fact, in the things that I've been thinking and writing of late, I've been saying that AI is not the beginning of a process; it's the
Right.
culmination of
That's
one.
right.
We've
That's
been
great.
operating with what is essentially artificial intelligence since Hobbes reduced thinking to simply reckoning with consequences, and since
Yeah.
intelligence became
Yeah.
pragmatic. I mean, this is artificial intelligence is the exemplary form of what intelligence is in a fundamentally technological and pragmatic society. And it turns out that a lot of so-called brain work has been machine work, effectively, or a kind of mechanized intelligence all along, simply awaiting a machine to come along and do it better and more efficiently, just as uh, assembly line labor was awaiting robotics. And so we're
Right.
seeing parallel processes there.
Right,
Um,
and this is present in Descartes. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
this is right there. I mean, he's positively obsessed with this model of the human being as a machine, and look, this is why I hope this doesn't take us too far afield, but when you read a 19th century novel, you really. If you read it with a certain kind of bent, I teach the Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich to my kids. And what's so fascinating to me, and this is not something that I necessarily get into with my kids because it's a little, kind of higher level, but that's fine. It's all there. But the enemy with which Ivan is constantly in flight from is because he has learned to become the best cog in the bureaucratic machine, right? So bureaucracy itself is a kind of technology. It is a kind of machine thinking that in the end uses humans as batteries to fulfill its own ends. And so therefore, this kind of ennui or dissatisfaction with which, members of the bureaucratic class, the professional managerial class, that enemy is, I think, the body's proper sort of inflammatory response to a system which seeks to use us for its own ends. And I don't think it's too woo to say something like, even though I'm totally fine with woo, I don't think it's too woo to recognize that the bureaucracy is a kind of spiritual attack on the human person.
yeah.
Well,
Well, I mean, in every encounter one has with bureaucracy in the
Yeah,
pre-AI form, um, what's inevitably so frustrating about it is that it is designed to eliminate all human judgment
right,
and all human responsibility.
right,
So so bureaucracy is fundamentally anti-political. I
right,
mean,
right.
this is the other side of
Oh, that's
this
so good. That's so
is
good.
that is that uh, rule by internet, as it were.
Yeah, yeah,
I think I'm of the opinion that we are already effectively in a post-political age.
yeah, yeah,
That we no longer
yeah.
inhabit a political society. That there are forms of rule that are much deeper and more extensive than the antiquated practice of gathering under a dome and passing laws. I mean, what's Congress even for now? But
Right.
to conduct show trials and raise money. I can't tell that they,
And even worse as kind of backdrop for your Instagram career.
yeah, 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 and it's not as if the normal human processes of political deliberation and decision can anticipate the next thing that Silicon Valley is going to force us to cope with anyway.
Mhm.
Even if we had a well functioning political system, it would be entirely reactive to the exigencies of this technological tsunami,
Yeah.
and largely inept in dealing with it. But going back to something earlier that you said when you something that you said earlier when you were mentioning how this is all present in Descartes.
Yep.
And this gets to the heart of what I fear most about AI. I mean, that entire project that the project of modern thought, modern philosophy that begins in Descartes and Hobbes and passes through Locke and culminates. You can decide whether you think it culminates in continental postmodernism,
Right. Right.
or and I actually think that it reaches one of its highest expressions in a form of thought that no one really traffics in anymore, but I think is fundamentally decisive for how we live, and that's American pragmatism.
Amen. Yeah.
But the entire project is about magnifying human power, or excuse me, magnifying reason's power precisely by reducing its scope.
Yeah.
In other words, narrowing the things that it is meaningful or possible for us even to think about. This is why God just disappears as even a meaningful or compelling question. You know, the eclipse of the sense of God and man that Benedict and John Paul II. It's not atheism exactly, because atheism is too much work.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's too much. And my great fear that the end result of this evacuation, this process of evacuation that we're talking about, is that we will no longer be capable of the ennui that you're describing.
Yeah. Right. Because we're so good at distracting ourselves. We're so good at concocting a yum system that I can just chase after. I mean, I can distract myself in perpetuity, and I think most people do.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, look, I'm as prone to that as anybody. I think the three of us would all agree that, you know, that sneaking concern that, you know, just because I can kind of hear what you're saying and I can kind of see what you're saying, like I'm a victim of this as well.
Right. What am I going to do with this 5 minutes of silence?
Right.
You know, how can I fill it or distract myself from it? But it's not just. I want to be careful in how I formulate this or how we phrase this, because I mean I think one of the weaknesses. I know you guys talked about Kingsnorth a couple of weeks ago, and I reviewed that book as well, and I think it's great.
Yeah.
And I think he's spot on. But one of the weaknesses that I detect, not only in that book, but elsewhere in other quote unquote remystification projects, is the denigration of thought. Right, for I don't know what, some kind of mysticism absent thought, or poetry, or you know, you can supply the missing ingredient there. And I'm worried about the intellectual and cognitive, as I know you are as a teacher, the intellectual and cognitive effects, our ability to think about truth as more than just the empirical or the pragmatically possible. Our capacity to think about what things are, what they might mean, to transcend, you know, the flux of our historical circumstances, and understand ourselves in the light of the deeper anthropology that you're talking about, which passes into fundamental ontology very quickly, right? I mean, anthropology never stands simply on its own. And this project of magnifying reason's power by limiting its scope, by simply eliminating or whole dimensions of our existence as objects of possible thought or of meaningful thought, worries me a great deal, because then of course you're absolutely powerless to resist whatever the tsunami brings next.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love Kingsnorth's book. I mean, I absolutely love it. And so there's obviously a but coming here, but I just want to begin with that because I hope everybody reads it. It's a fantastic book. And it's very, very clear that what Kingsnorth means when he says reason, he means that Baconian reason. The Enlightenment reason. He means Gilchrist's, you know, master and the emissary, where the emissary has become the master, and so on. But it's a shame that he doesn't sort of tease out of that idea, nuance that idea into a better understanding of the relationship between reason and what Kale goes, the woo stuff. Because what ends up then in a sort of neo-Luddite position is the notion that that we really just need to go scorched earth. That the only way to retrieve our humanity is by suppressing our intellect and going out into the deep woods and, chanting druid hymns or something or other. Not that King's North, I'm not saying he's saying that,
No, no, fair enough.
but
Yeah.
No, I
you
don't
get
think
my.
he's saying that either, but I wish you were a little bit more careful to be clear that he's not saying that.
Yeah. Yes. He's not saying that. But, that's how I felt as I was reading the book. I felt like, geez, I just want to go out into the woods now and
Yeah.
sprinkle pixie dust on trees, hoping that a fairy comes out or something or other, But obviously, no, that is not what King's North is saying. So I want to rush to his defense here. But you are correct, Mike, that all of these re-enchantment projects, all of these kinds of things, do run this risk. I mentioned in my podcast with you, Mike, the book, but I know you love the book, Anton Barbacay, A Web of Our Own Making. And it's a very depressing book because he essentially says there's no way of escaping this web. And so, before, at the risk of talking too much, I want to set up my question to you guys by appealing to my friend Mark Stallman, who has been really on this thing for many years now, where he says that our consciousness has been changed in the digital age. I mean, we went through the oral age, then the written age, then the kind of electronic, analog, radio, TV age, and now we're in the digital age. And each one of these eras alters our consciousness. But I was struck when you were talking about how this goes back to Descartes, and it goes back to bureaucracy, that periodization, if you will, of human consciousness has its place. But I'm wondering to what extent the digital age does represent an intensification of the metaphysical, philosophical mistakes that go back to the Enlightenment and before, nominalism and so forth. If it doesn't represent an intensification of all of that in a way that's different than simply Tolstoy's musings on bureaucracy or whatever. Anyway, that's for
Yeah,
one of
no, it's a good question. I mean, my instincts tell me that we're in a far advanced place than complaints about czarist bureaucracy in late, pre-Bolshevik Russia.
Yeah.
That the digital seems to represent a mechanism by which we can totally skip the analog to the point where we are living in a kind of hothouse flower of a civilization that is almost entirely cut off from the reality of biological life.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Larry.
I was just going to say, I mean, and I agree with what you just said, Kale, about biological life, and I want to come back to that. But I guess my question too is, does the digital age represent the fulfillment of Bacon and Descartes? Is this their fever dream? Does the digital age not represent the coming home to roost of everything that they metaphysically longed for?
I'll go back to the earlier point about differences in degree and differences in kind.
Yeah.
Right. And the tipping point from where one passes from one to the other is blurry. It's difficult to identify, and I don't know precisely where it is. I would want to say, on the one hand, the answer to your question is yes, right? That the priority, the elimination of inherent form and meaning, and the elimination of all the transcendentals, really, from having any grounding in reality, the elevation of power or possibility or potency over actuality, the reduction of reason to pragmatic success, all of those things that are at the core of that sort of founding modern vision, I think, have come to fruition, and this represents the fruition of that. On the other hand, and this I think ties into what Kale was saying about biological life. The obliteration of reality is so complete, or the substitution of a kind of ersatz reality that we are able to fabricate, and therefore the evacuation of the real world. I mean, in every sphere, biological reality, time and space, rootedness in place, all of it is so complete that if it is the fulfillment of their dream, it's a fulfillment beyond their wildest imagination, right? And beyond what I think anyone in the 17th century could have conceived. Although when you read the New Atlantis, it's remarkable the sort of prophetic foresight into the inventions and the products to come, which have effectively come to pass. But in the same way that the digital represents something other than or more than, and not simply an extension of the analog, I think there's an analogy to the way in which the times that we're now living in are both dependent upon in the fruition of that vision on the one hand, but probably in some ways also even its obliteration, right? I mean, certainly they never conceived subjecting ourselves to systems of our own making that would control us rather than the reverse. They didn't see what C.S. Lewis sees so beautifully in the third lecture of
Abolition,
the abolition of man, and what the conquest of nature must always and essentially mean.
Right. The rule of some over the many. Is that what you're referencing?
Well, not even just the sum over the many, but I mean, this would be where I might want to modify Lewis in a sense.
Go ahead,
because I'm not sure. I mean, it's a system of. I'm not sure there's a Mustafa Mon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, a controller who's pulling the levers.
Yeah.
You create a machine that runs on its own, and there are no levers to pull, or the levers only affect modest kinds of changes. I mean, in other words, the subordination of human beings to a kind of post-human, unhuman, non-human, anti-human rule.
So think about the spell. I'm gonna cast a spell here. I want to see if you guys get it. Diversity is our strength. Right. Okay. Right. So right. I mean, we can play. Look, we've all been subject to these things, and so we can poke 1,000 holes in it. But like, what if it's true? Right. In other words, whose strength? Who is the hour that we're talking about when we say diversity is our strength? Because, what you seem to be talking about here, Michael, is the notion that there's no like Mustafa Mon. There's not this sort of the world comptroller that's, the Wizard of Oz, et cetera, right? But rather there's this sort of this diversified, you can't really blame any one thing or bit. It's this thing that we all kind of like run up against from time to time, but there's nobody in charge.
Right.
Right. And so is that the spell of the machine? Like nobody's in charge. There's no one person you can point to. The great limitations, for instance, of 20th century totalitarianism turned out to be that Stalin dies. What if we could create a system in which we don't even need a Stalin?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I thought this was one of the things that was so interesting in the discovery that apparently Joe Biden was never actually president.
Yeah, perfect. No, but again, all jokes aside, that's exactly right.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is what was so fascinating about the. I mean, not to veer off into empirical politics or very far down that road, but the contrast between all Trump's obvious and enormous flaws aside, right? I mean, I tend to think that Trump is something of a tyrant in the old-fashioned sense, but tyranny is a recognizable human political form.
Yeah.
Right. And there's with bearers of responsibility. And you contrast that with a form of rule in which an actual executive isn't necessary.
Okay. So
because the machine runs on its own.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm right in the middle of teaching that hideous strength right now, right? And if you look closely at the way that the NICE, the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments, is structured, is that there's no real org chart,
right?
Right? Wither is the deputy director, and the director is like clearly just this sort of inserted figurehead, but the figurehead's not in charge. Wither is not really in charge. Is Frost in charge? Is Philostrato in charge? Is Fairy Hardcastle in charge? And the answer to all of those questions is at the same time yes
Yes.
and no.
Yeah.
Right. And so Mark's frustration, Mark Studdock, the main character's frustration, is like, where do I fit in the machine? Like, if you could just sort of tell me what department I'm in, who I'm under, what work you want me to do, then I can get on board. And then, like, oh, you sweet summer child. That's not what's important. Now, of course, we know, again, and just in terms of the way that the novel functions, that the head is not even the head,
Right.
right? That all of these pieces are being animated in essence by the macrobes, right? These sort of demon-like creatures that are using the physical world and using possessed people to sort of affect the destruction of civilization as we know it. Ultimately, fascinatingly enough, of course, it's the destruction of the body. And Michael, you brought up earlier, you were talking about the polis as the kind of organizing model for the world up until, the modern revolutions, right? It's a body. I mean, it's fun. The polis is fundamentally operates on the level of, the Dunbar number
Yeah.
and the various sort of levels of the Dunbar number. Well, we have blown right through all of that, that our political structures are not even physical anymore.
Right. Right.
Right. And so to me, when I hear diversity is our strength, my question is like, who is the our
Yeah.
talking right now? Is it the macrobes? Again, metaphorically, maybe not. It seems to me that it is.
Yeah. Everybody and nobody.
Right.
I mean, I want to go back to your point about nice. One of one of the examples that I've used over and over again in different venues to illustrate this kind of power um, is the phenomenon of cancellation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is an extraordinarily effective social weapon in being
Yeah.
able to induce. I mean, and I mean, if you think about peak wokeness and
Yeah.
the period of the pandemic and all the
Yeah.
rest of it, I mean, to terrorize people, frankly,
Yeah.
into what Zuboff calls anticipatory conformity,
Yes.
right?
Great
Because the
line.
idea
Great
that
line.
it's a wonderful line and it's so accurate because the very idea that the most innocuous misstatement can call down the furies from nowhere at any time, in any place, on anybody. You can be some anonymous pizza
Yeah.
shop owner in the
Yeah.
Midwest somewhere and have your life suddenly subject to the microscope of the world and be absolutely destroyed. So let's take this phenomenon, which has happened over and over and over again. Who does it?
Right.
Like,
Right.
who's responsible for now obviously there are actors in this
Yeah. Right. We can
virtual.
trace it. We can trace it in a kind of micro bracket, right? But that's not really what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, because there's organizations like CNN or the New York Times or whatever have enormous power in sort of giving inputs into this machine,
Mhm.
right? But they don't pull all the levers and control the outcome. Once the inputs are given, they bounce around,
Yeah.
and it has this sort of aggregate causal effect that seems to be the work of everybody and nobody at the same time, just as you were describing. If you ever decided that, right, we want to hold the counselors responsible for all the havoc they've wreaked on these poor people's lives, you could never identify anyone who was responsible and who could be brought to account for it. And that to me is just an illustration of the way this kind of post-political exercise of agency, or not really agency, in as much as that implies deliberate
Right.
intention. We don't even have a language for this,
Right.
Exercise is a political causation.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
In the sense of a kind of blind, efficient causality.
You know what it
The way
reminds me of?
these things work.
You know what it reminds me of, and again, I'm gonna be way over my skis on this, but if you've ever looked into how a rice cooker works,
I have not.
so it employs what I think they call it fuzzy logic, and it's this idea that it can change and alter its temperature and intensity and pressure relative to what it senses in the pot of rice that it's cooking, right?
Exactly.
So
I was just making rice yesterday and it said 8 minutes to finish. And then a minute later it said 9 minutes to finish. And I'm trying to figure out what the
yeah.
hell's going on with my
Right.
rice cooker.
So what you're seeing is, I mean, this is employed. It's called fuzzy logic. I believe you can fact check me, anybody.
No,
I think it's
fuzzy
called,
logic. That's a thing. Yeah.
yeah, it's a fuzzy logic. And so, maybe, Michael, what you're getting at is that we have been placed into a kind of fuzzy logic system that alters and changes and moves around and shifts, so that you can't even draw neat causality. You just sort of have that experience. You sort of throw your hands up in the air. It's like, I don't know who's in charge. I don't know what's going on, but I know I got to do X. And so therefore, the best way to kind of get along in the fuzzy logic system is just do X
Yeah, yeah. And
until
the
it.
and the fuzzy logic system, I mean, this goes back then to what it means to suggest that we're already living in a post-political era.
Yeah, yeah,
There's no way to bring this thing to heel.
right,
There's no way to subordinate it to traditional political processes or to law.
mhm,
And the law doesn't reach deeply enough to compel a pizza shop owner in Ohio to moderate her inner thoughts about X or Y issue
yeah,
in the way that this does, which illustrates the fact that the governance of the fuzzy logic system is much more effective, much more compelling, much more interior as well as
yeah.
exterior than traditional political rule. And I was going to attempt to connect this back to AI, but I think I've lost my train of thought. It's simply to say then that the further immersion into these algorithmic processes that are
Right,
running out to meet us is almost certain to intensify all of those dynamics,
right.
right?
So
To complete the governance, as it were.
right, right. And if you listen closely to like the guys in Silicon Valley, when they talk about this thing, AI, if you really prod them, now some of them are much more forthcoming and they'll sort of say it out loud, and sometimes it's just the cranks that say it out loud. But they all know this. And if the audience, if they take anything away from why I'm low key petrified by what these six men in Silicon Valley are doing right now, is that AI and the rush to AGI is not being built, it's being grown. And that's how they talk about it,
Hmm.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
Larry,
No.
Larry, so you worked a farm, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know that if you go, even if you talk about livestock or whatever, but basically everybody knows, right? You can plant a bunch of stuff, you can water it, but the farmer doesn't do it. The
No.
farmer creates the necessary conditions for the crop, to grow.
Yeah.
And it can grow in ways that you were completely not in control of. What if then what is being built in Silicon Valley is not being built, but it is being grown? And so therefore, if it's being grown, you know that you can't control it. And unlike, a corn sprout where I can just rip it out of the ground and, shred it up and burn it and destroy it, we're past that point where the people who are in charge of building it aren't in charge.
Yeah, and there's a fail safe built right into the damn
Right,
things.
right.
Insofar as if you do try to interrupt it, it thwarts you by cutting your legs out
It
from
it
underneath you.
hallucinates,
It
quote unquote.
hallucinates. So let me come back to something you said, though, Kale, that I think it was just this past year. You and I may have even done a podcast on this. I know Rod Dreher posted this video of I can't remember the guy's name, a young Silicon Valley guy, or maybe he worked at MIT, I can't remember, who was instrumental in working on AI,
Yeah,
who quit working on AI and came out and said, beware.
yeah,
The end of the world is around the corner.
yeah. It's
Dooms.
AI 2027.
Yeah, so there are voices out there from amongst people who have worked on AI and but that echo exactly what you're saying, Kale, but this is something not invented so much as it was initially invented. Now it's growing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't know where it's going to go and how it's going to grow, and it's going to outgrow our ability to control it.
Right. It's a
That's
lab leak. It's a lab leak, right? And I
and
think
then
that's the metaphor
yeah.
we have to use.
Yeah.
So what if an AI out there who has access to laboratory biolab something or other decides to bioengineer a deadly virus, the ultimate death virus for human beings, and then
What
release
if?
it, and
What
then
if?
release it, and release it. That would be a way of wiping us out. But then I wonder, apocalyptically, well, can't we just unplug the power source? I mean, these things are ultimately dependent upon us still. Is not some apocalyptic thinking now a little bit over the top? I can't imagine how AI would take over the world without a coal-fired power plant down the street
Yeah.
running the damn. Go ahead, Mike.
Two thoughts. One, the difficulty of unplugging the power source is that, unfortunately, the how do I want to describe this? The entanglements, right?
Yeah.
The webs of dependence that we construct for ourselves as we create this technology means that when you unplug the power source, not only does AI die, but so do we, right? Because everything that we do is contingent upon it. I mean, your car will no longer run.
Yeah.
Right? Your internet goes down. Your power. I mean, it's remarkable how. I mean, and Anthony Eslin is great on this point, right?
Yeah.
The idea of how
Yeah.
much the medieval farmer knew about his world relative to those of us who've insulated
Yeah.
ourselves from it by our technology,
Yeah.
such that when the technology fails, we find ourselves utterly helpless. We have no idea what to do when the heat and the power goes out.
Right. That's the hothouse flower
Yeah.
image that I was invoking earlier.
That's the one point. But the second point is it might be worth, and I'm totally spitballing here. Might be worth sticking with Kale's growth image here to think a little bit more about what that means and how we ought to think about this. And in one sense, the machine might not be the quite the right, the King's North notion of the machine might not be quite the right image insofar as the machine is a kind of artificial organism, right? I mean that it's the perfection of art's imitation of nature in that it now
Right.
imitates nature as metabolic,
Yep. Yep.
and therefore as growing in three dimensions, right? Not just in a kind of linear sequence. I mean, it's worth, I think, and maybe this isn't the place to try and just do it off the top of our head in front of God and everybody, but it's worth, I think, contemplating what is embedded in our attribution of a kind of life or intelligence to this. I mean, on the one hand, there is the reduction and the evacuation of human intelligence and all the things that we've said thus far. But there's also the recognition that there's an approximation of an organic quality in not just AI itself, but in the entire system of which it is a part that we need to reckon with. Precisely because the notion of growth as opposed to being built captures something about the character of this thing that might otherwise go invisible. There's and I'm thinking, I mean, here of I don't know how familiar either of you are with Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition.
Yeah, I am.
But she has some really great anticipatory criticisms along these lines. The idea of the social sphere as a kind of imitation of the metabolic character of pure life, where she has the contrast between use and consumption, for example. And she has this great line apropos of something that Kale said earlier, but maybe not apropos of what I've just been saying, but I'll trot it out there anyway, which is that the problem with behaviorism is not that it's false, but that we might create the conditions whereby it becomes true.
Uh,
And
wow.
the
Yeah.
idea that we're reduced to a kind of bare uh, but real ultimately subhuman life, right?
Right, right, right. Okay, so connect this, Michael, to what we were, what I was talking about at the very beginning of this discussion about my deep concern of AI with my students.
Yes, yes, yes. We're on the same page here.
Yeah,
Well, simply that a kind of life that is just completely subject to necessity, though in this
yes,
case, it's not to the sphere of necessity,
right, right,
though in
right,
this
right,
case, it's not the natural necessities that once
right,
dominated us, but
right.
the sphere of artificial
That's
necessities that
right.
we've
Oh,
created
oh,
mimics
yes.
that.
Oh,
Right? So
yes.
we're subject to um, how we're compelled to act, how we're compelled to live, the rhythms that these algorithms set for us,
Mhm.
what it is possible or permissible to think. And this would be the concern is that the sphere of the domination by AI is ultimately subjection to a new sphere of artificial organic necessity.
Right, and therefore artificial inorganic teleology.
Yes, yes, yes.
Man, that's good.
Yeah.
That's really
And,
interesting.
and then if you ask how it is then that um, human beings always understood themselves to secure their freedom against a sphere of necessity that they can't escape. And this is where I
Right.
think King's North is right, right?
Yeah.
If this thing is already advanced far enough that we can't get outside of it, there's no desert to retreat to,
Yep.
except perhaps the desert of the spirit, right?
Yeah.
The desert is just as under the watchful eye of Google Maps as Google Earth as any other place on Earth. The way that human beings escape, or excuse me, um, preserve their humanity
Mhm.
within the sphere of necessity is by transcending it, right?
Wow.
I.e., by philosophy,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is
Leisure.
why, therefore,
Piperian leisure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, right. Which is why, therefore, a technology that drains that from you, that steals that
Wow.
from you, that destroys your capacity or offers to relieve you of the burden of thinking,
Yeah.
is if there's no freedom without intelligence, right? If the truth sets you
Wow.
free, right? If freedom
Okay.
and truth are not opposites but correlative,
Yeah.
then a technology which eliminates your capacity to apprehend and think about the truth is got to be ultimately the ultimate enslavement.
You know, in a lot of ways, this is the perfect conversation for me because as an interviewer, I always love it when I just get to sit back and watch my guests uh, talk away in ways that I could not possibly even achieve. So thank you two guys. But I do have uh, you've now said something, Michael, that has really been on my mind a lot lately about AI, and that is deception. That is lies. I
Yeah.
remember how influenced I was in my youth. I read a book by the novelist writer Arthur Kestler called Darkness at Noon, which was
Yeah.
his. I don't know if either one of you have ever read Darkness at
No.
Noon.
No. No.
I highly recommend it. It's his takedown of Stalinist Russia. Uh, I'm not going to go bore you with the details, but the fact that that it was a regime based on mendacity
Yeah.
from top to bottom, lies, lies, lies. I'm reminded too of the miniseries on Chernobyl that was it was
So good.
fantastic.
So good.
Where at the very very end the Lugasov, the physicist, says, how can an RBMK reactor explode? Lies. Decades
Mm,
of
mm,
lies.
mm,
That's how it explodes. Lies upon lies upon lies. And
mm,
so,
mm.
you mentioned earlier, was Joe Biden really president and that we're in a post-political, is Donald Trump really president? Is
Right. Right.
anybody ever really president? We were talking off screen before we even went on, that are we living in the Truman Show on steroids? How can we trust anything? One of the reasons why I think Tyler Robinson really did kill Charlie Kirk is that Tyler Robinson isn't dead. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas the MIT
Right.
and
Amen.
Brown shooter is
Amen.
dead.
Yeah.
Thomas Crooks is dead,
Mhm, mhm,
whereas Tyler
mhm.
Robinson is alive. So he probably did it.
Yeah.
So, he did something outside of the Truman Show. So they're just going to let him go to trial. So I don't mean to and Rod Dreher's written a lot, live not by lies.
Yeah.
To what extent, therefore, is the greatest casualty of AI going to be truth and our the human epistemic quality of trust, trusting that what we know, we
Trough.
know,
Mm.
that we know. Uh, how can, as I said to you before we went on, I'm not certain we can know shit about shit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because of this, and you watch some reel on Facebook and the first question you ask, is this
Is it
real or
real?
is it,
Yeah.
or is it AI?
Yeah.
Is it real or is it AI? But anyway, that's not so much a question as me wanting to direct the conversation maybe towards this question of truth. Mike?
Well, I mean, truth, even our very concept of what truth is, right, has been in peril for a long time. And with
Yeah.
respect to your earlier question, I mean, if truth is essentially feasibility, then it's just whatever we can make happen. And I think
Yeah.
that's been the dominant way of thinking about truth in a technological and pragmatic society for a long time. So we didn't need to await the arrival of AI in this now form to be suffering a crisis of truth.
Mm-hmm.
But it does exponentially. I mean, what it does do is dissolve those institutions and realities that were sort of the imperfect bearers of
Right.
the authority of truth. And leave you in this kind of Truman-esque hall of mirrors. And another aspect of this that we were talking about offline, and I think we're seeing more and more and more of this in a variety of different ways, is that first of all, trust, right? Assent to the recognition of a common world, right? The sort of ideological world that is shared as the basis of our common life is the foundation of anything resembling a political society. So if you lose that in a fundamental way, which if we haven't done, it seems like we're approaching that, then you no longer have a political society. And when you no longer have a common, forget the common good, when you no longer have a common world, right, then you have to have a common power, as Hobbes says, to keep everybody to sort of govern by keeping everyone in awe. But of course, awe, to be governed, as it were, by awe is unsettling, and it's internally unsettling. And one of the upshots of this, I think, is that the disappearance of basic trust in the stability of reality, the authority of our institutions, all of it. The upshot is it's a recipe for mass psychosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And I think we have experienced in manifold ways, actually. In fact, I would be inclined to think of
Yes. Yes.
a lot of what goes under the banner of wokeness, particularly some of the trans stuff, as a form of we need to think of this not as a matter of clinical psychology, but as a matter of political psychology,
and therefore bodily. Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Larry,
the alienation from our bodies, from reality,
and like being where my 2 feet are.
Yeah.
Right. Our technology allows us to be elsewhere. Our technology allows us to be anywhere, and therefore we're nowhere.
Yeah, to just sort of float as angry and increasingly violent ghosts. So I mean, I worry that what we have seen and are seeing. I mean, and it turns out. I mean, I don't know what's going on in the connection between what happened at Brown and at MIT. It appears that there's a rationale below the surface that we're not privy to, in as far as these two incidents are connected. But there are plenty of other incidents where there seems to be no intelligible rationale whatsoever, right, for just the most atrocious acts of public violence. I fear that's going to get worse, precisely because we're living in an age of mass psychosis, not in the sort of narrowly clinical sense, but in a deeper, more existential, social, and political sense.
So good.
Well, yeah,
Because
that we're exi
reality has been because reality is dissolved under our feet.
Well,
Hyper
it's
reality.
exactly right. It's like our entire society lives in a disassociative state. The very definition of psychosis. You
Yeah,
are in a disassociative.
Wow.
I'm reminded of Neil Postman's observation that with the invention of telegraph, but then especially radio, there was the invention of this completely abstract thing that had never existed before called the news of the day.
That's right. That's right.
The news of the day, and in which you learn about everything going on in Tunisia and
Yeah.
Shanghai and so forth, but you don't know what your next door neighbor is up to.
Yeah.
That you lose that, like you said, Kale, my 2 feet standing right here.
Mhm.
That globalist ethic has as part of its ethos, whether deliberate or not, the destruction of the local, the
That's
destruction
right.
of this concreteness, and the movement into a kind of psychotic realm of abstraction that is so easily manipulated.
yeah,
It's dream world. I mean, the virtual world is a dream world, and it seems to be subject to the same kind of illogic of a phantasmagoria, right? That
Yeah.
and that's why I think so many of us are like scratching our heads all the time, like, well, what the heck is going on? And I wonder if using kind of Charles Taylor's notion of the subtraction story or the subtraction myth, that modernism, sort of broadly understood, um, has always been understood as finally, scraping away all of the sort of the barnacles of tradition and the barnacles of bad seeing. And so we can finally see, what you were talking about, Michael, in terms of truth is, what you can count in essence.
or make or do.
Right, right. And that the psychosis is in part driven and electrified by the fact that we have this nagging sense that there's something much more going on than just the thing I can count.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing too, I would say
Hmm.
about the phantasmagoria or the dream world, is that it turns then on the real world. I mean, there's got to be a
Yeah, yeah,
connection
yeah.
between this disincarnate sort of ghostly reality that we live, where we can bring the world to us. And in fact, what we need with the swipe of the thumb. And the fact, and forgive me if I'm repeating something. I've said this somewhere. It might have been last week on your podcast, Larry. I don't know, but there has to be a connection between this and the fact that the toiletries at the CVS down the street
Yeah.
have to be kept under
Yeah.
guarded by armed guards.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, public spaces where we use the commons, right?
Mhm.
The common
Yeah.
spaces that we used to inhabit and interact with each other, the actual public squares. Um,
Yeah, if I
um,
want to buy Sudafed, I have to give a lock of hair for my firstborn and a blood
Yeah.
sample.
Yeah.
right. Well, but it also means these spaces are then abandoned and left to deteriorate.
Yeah.
Right. And the result is that they're subject to chaos.
Yeah.
Violence and chaos.
Right.
I have long thought that the decline of brick and mortar retail shopping, the fact that this is no longer one of the things that one can sort of just take for granted as something. I mean, as banal as it is, and as
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
much as it may be, wrapped up in larger capitalist dynamics and
Right.
all the
Right.
rest
Right.
of it.
Right.
These are places.
Right.
These are actual places where we intersect with one another, right? And I've long thought that the crisis that those areas or those fields or activities are undergoing is a sign of something much deeper, right? The deeper alienation that are living as ghosts brings about.
Yeah, I'm reminded here of Matthew Crawford's work, in The World Beyond Your Head,
Yeah,
and the
Yeah.
idea
Yeah.
of the commons as something we're in danger of losing, and just the skill as you say, of being a body in a space with other bodies.
Yeah.
Right after Scrooge goes through his three visions, um, the first thing that he does on Christmas morning in the last chapter of A Christmas Carol, after he buys he sends the boy to get the turkey to give to Bob Cratchit and all that. He shaves. He's trying to shave, and he's like, he's so worked up that it's a struggle, which is an interesting physical point.
Yeah.
But the first thing that he does is he goes out into the streets of London to kind of relish the world outside of his counting shed, right? And he just sort of wants to be around people, and he's smiling at people, interacting with people. That there's this, he almost seems to intuit that he needs to be with people, in this physical environment, because his entire world has been an abstraction out of the physical environment. He's been living in his spreadsheets, in his ledger books, and that has deformed him radically. And so that first step in his reformation is to sort of throw himself back into people, into groups of people.
That's a great point. Now contrast it. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
No, I was just saying a related point would be like George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
He longs, abstracts to get out of this small town to this small town. He's going to kill himself. Then he's shown all these things, what life would have been life without him. And all of a sudden when he comes back, hello, building and loan.
Yes, that's right.
Zuzu's pedals, Zuzu's pedals. Yeah. All of a sudden it's concrete. I'm here. I'm back. I want to be with these people.
Mm-hmm.
But contrast that then with the experience of going out back into the world as a consequence of our all living as these angry, disembodied, psychotic ghosts. I mean, crowds in public spaces are unsettling now.
Yeah.
Right, because of the things that can happen in them. You can't trust them anymore.
Yeah,
you can't trust. I mean, I don't want to over dramatize this. I go out all the time. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that I hide in my house for fear of seeing other people. That's not the case at all. But places that you would once take for granted as being trustworthy, that you could escape from your counting house out into the real world, are now, because all of their occupants are these alienated, disincarnate figures. You have to think of, I mean, school shootings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
What could be sort of more sort of sacrosanct outside, other than church?
Right. Here we track.
Than a school. Right. And the very idea now that schools have to be, or the very reality that so many schools, in effect, have to be guarded.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to pass through metal detector. And there's reason for that.
Yeah. Right.
It's these are signs of, these are signs of something very deep in our culture that's not that we're prevented from seeing, I think, by all kinds of things. One, our over clinicalization, our tendency to treat the technocratic tendency to treat every human problem as a technical/clinical problem.
Yeah.
Which prevents us from seeing social pathologies or regarding them as such. And of course, this is also our native individualism, right? Is also a part of this. We don't see the social pathologies lurking beneath the surface of our culture.
Yeah.
I think they're there.
It's just like, after the Bondi Beach shootings, all these Australian politicians came out. This only emphasizes why we need better gun control.
Right.
The reduction of what is essentially a human problem to a technological one. Now, maybe they do need better gun control. I'm not a gun
Maybe
enthusiast.
we do. Sure.
I don't even know what to think about that issue. I'm not a huge Second Amendment, purist kind of a guy. Nevertheless, I was struck by the fact, well, wait a minute. I have read studies that say, Americans, for example, on a per capita basis, were more heavily armed in the 19th century than they are now. And yet the murder rate is far greater now with handguns and so forth than it was in the 19th century. So it's very clear that you could regulate guns till the moon went through all of its phases and back, but it's not necessarily going to eliminate the human problem.
Right.
Uh,
And I would recommend to the audience a parable for us to understand what we're trying to build out here.
yeah.
There's a great four-part series on Netflix right now called Death by Lightning, which charts or it's the story of the assassination of James Garfield and the convention that yielded him, which is also very interesting. But also the psychosis, the individual psychosis that leads the assassin to kill Garfield, right? Now,
Yeah, it was his doctors that killed him,
yeah, right, right,
not the
right.
assassin. But
Yeah,
anyway,
and
go
they and
ahead.
they and they and they point that out. But in
Yeah.
terms of the actual, pulling the trigger of the gun, right? We can look at those stories as a mechanism by which we diagnose something inexplicable in the present, right? Because you could say, oh, who cares? It's in the 19th century. It was this, that, and the other. But we tell stories and we watch stories so that we can understand and gain some kind of perspective on what's going on now, right? That's why we tell stories. It's a kind of technology, you might say. But he really believes, like when you look at individual psychosis, he really believes, Gate is the guy's name, he really believes that this is what is warranted, that this is necessary, that the problem will be solved by executing James Garfield. Now, it's a fascinating question. Like, what is the thought process? What is the psychosis that goes into leading an individual to do something like that? And I think that's an important question. But what if the algorithms, what if, the AI, what if all of these things, these are the very things that are not only, you know, causing individuals to act like this, but creating the very conditions upon which this strikes an individual as true. Like this is what I need to do, right? And any of us, of course, would just simply pull this Gate guy like, hey, this is probably not going to do what you think it's going to do. This is not necessary. But what if we live in a world in which everybody is being pushed because of our artificial intelligence into these kind of cul-de-sacs of thought that call forth the logic of mass murder? You know, we're not talking about the lone gunman, right? We're talking about something much, much more profound, much, much more paranoid,
Yeah.
that is not just going to affect, the so-called lone gunman, but many, many of us.
Yes.
And
Go
to
ahead,
me,
Mike.
that's what the AIs are democratizing.
Good point. Mike.
I mean, I'm not sure what I have to add to that, other than that I agree that this opens up avenues or lines of thought that we're not that accustomed to thinking about that we ought to.
Yeah.
And um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll leave it at that. I mean, I need to
But
process that a bit more. And I'm
okay,
sorry.
well, we're about an hour and a half in. Let
I,
me throw this out there, but before we end, I mean, we can
Mhm.
go on for as long as we want. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we all have things to do. But thinking apocalyptically, as I want to do from time to time, I'm not by nature an apocalyptic person, and yet events of the modern world can't help but create a certain. And by apocalypse, I don't mean second coming of Christ, Bible
Yeah, yeah,
prophecy.
yeah.
Well,
Unveiling.
just the unveiling of something, one does get the sense in this digital age, in this AI age, that 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 we're on the verge of something either stupendous and or stupendously catastrophic and or unbelievably revealing.
Mhm.
You see this in the UAP phenomena with regard,
Mhm.
oh, the disclosure project.
Mhm.
Disclosure is about to happen. Disclosure has evidently been about to happen for 50 years or something or other. But what's going to be disclosed? Oh, wait to see. So I'm struck when I study history by how great, huge events are often created by some tripwire. You know, when the Archduke, who
Yeah,
would have imagined that Archduke Ferdinand getting assassinated by some Serbian nut job would lead to the greatest conflagration in the history of the world, which then itself set up the next greatest
yeah,
conflagration, genocidal monstrosity in the history of the world, allowed for the Bolshevik Revolution, created the Cold War, blah, blah, blah. That single tripwire would
yeah,
you'd never be able to predict in advance that Archduke Ferdinand getting
right,
assassinated
right.
would cause that cascading domino effect. So my
Yeah,
question is, in this sort of age of disclosure, in this sense of something's about to happen, I just have a sense that all that's going to be required is some kind of black swan event, some kind of tripwire that's going to be triggered, that's going to send forth a cascade of events uh, that we can't control. I don't. There's not a question in there so
yeah.
much as a way of ending this conversation with a sort of note of doom,
Mhm.
a note of doom that maybe there's a tripwire just around the corner. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I look, the ratchet only goes one way, right? And our ratchet that we all seem to be feeling ambiently, um, leads me to conclude that it can't go on. I think the thing that gives me pause and concern as a father, as a teacher, is that what we are all experiencing, this kind of ratchet, that goes one way, tighten, 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 without a release button. I just feel like it can't go on.
Right.
And if I'm looking backwards, that a kind of massive conflagration is the only thing that doesn't release the ratchet but destroys it. And I don't
Yeah.
say that with I say that with zero glee. Um, but I can't help that. That's where I am right now. That we all know, those of us who pay attention, those of us who have some kind of perspective by way of what we have studied and learned in the course of our ever lengthening lifespans. Um, it can't go on.
You know,
And
yeah, I agree.
mm,
As our radio telescopes listen to the cosmos
mm,
and we hear nothing but silence,
mm,
the conclusion that many reach is, oh, we are alone.
mm,
Maybe we are extremely rare. Either that or civilizations that survive their technological phase and emerge into a post-technological phase in which they're not sending radio waves out into the universe. So to go with your ratchet metaphor there, Kale, what I'm thinking is, yeah, there's going to be, this is my thinking. This can't just continue on exponentially, ratchet, ratchet, ratchet. Something is going to happen, and we're going eventually going to have to end up, I think, in either our own self-destruction, where we
mm,
just will not be as a species.
mm,
But because I'm a Christian, I don't think that will happen.
mm.
Or we will end up in a post-technological age. But a post-technological age will not look like a pre-technological age. And we
Right,
do
right.
not know yet what a post-technological age even means or what it would look like. That's kind of where I am right now. Mike, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this.
Um, I don't know the future, and I don't know how elastic uh, reality and human nature are. We're testing those boundaries and how taut the ratchet strap can be pulled before it snaps. Maybe much more than we think. I think about the fact that for most, and I apologize for these strange. This is all just the sun outside my windows, altering the lighting. Now I'm completely in the dark here. Maybe this is appropriate for these
Yes,
foreboding
yes,
There we go.
foreboding.
those
Post-technological
ominous.
age.
Yeah, I'll be illuminated again in a second. Um, and see if I can recover my train of thought. I think about the fact that for most of our our academic careers, Larry, which have run more or less on parallel, it seemed like the sort of conventional American liberalism that had its left and right varieties was just this immovable force, right? And that
Yeah.
and that nothing ever really happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's remarkable in the space of a very short time.
Hmm.
The sort of revolutionary forces that have emerged and that we've been subject to and that we can kind of see. I mean, I tell my students all the time, to at least take consolation in the fact that it's not every generation that gets a front row seat to the
Yeah.
collapse of civilization.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of exciting,
Yeah.
not in a good way, but I mean, it's, and you probably have this, both of you probably have this experience. It's very difficult even to think or write about things in the present because, you know, my thoughts feel obsolete oftentimes before they see the light of day. But in spite of all of that, uh, I wonder, whether or not the wire's already been tripped on the one hand, and whether
Good
or
point.
not if these cascading events then are set in motion, um, whether we'll be able to perceive them, right? Whether we'll be able to perceive the nature of the revolution that we are subject to and undergoing. This is one of the great concerns about that we've already articulated about the AIification of our minds, is that it deprives us of our ability to think about and to see and to understand what's happening to us, and therefore we're just swept along by it.
Oh, that is such a great point. I mean, in Kingsnor's book, he talks at length about the dangers of transgenderism, as it's the camel's nose under the tent with regard to transhumanism in general, the transing of everything to such an extent that our very humanity is going to be surpassed. And so the question you raised, Michael, this is very, very interesting, is will we even notice
Yeah, yeah.
as our humanity is being transformed from within into something not human?
And think about this. You were describing earlier the I forget who it was that made the observation that this new thing came into being at some point around the turn of the 20th century, called the latest news.
Neil
Um,
Postman.
Postman, right, right, right. Um, can you even imagine what it would have been to live in a world without that?
No.
I mean,
No.
this is the thing. Um, I can't either. None of us can. I dare say, and um, that means that there are whole ways of being human that are largely unimagined. That have defined
Yeah.
or characterized the way of being human for most of human history that are all but lost to us. I mean, we can kind of access why literature is so important. And why technology free spaces in our school are so important that maybe it's still possible to conceive of this. But I think about that, and then I think about the fact that the three of us here are probably of the last generation that is going to remember a time um, before trans, right? A time before the radical biomedical, the normalization of radical biomedical procedures for bringing it about, that are going to remember interacting with the world without the medium of a screen, right? I mean, our grandchildren, they're going to be born into a world. This is going to be like electric light for them.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
just a given. It's going to
Yeah.
set the parameters of their world and their imagination. And I worry about what they'll be able to see and think about once we've really internalized all of this.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
a book recommendation, that gets at this from its sort of closer to its inception point is a book called Image by Borstein, written just in the aftermath of Kennedy's election over Nixon I think the book was written in 1961. And he's the one who coins, somebody being famous for being famous, right? And the idea that our entire world is driven and constructed by the fabrication of images that are not the capturing of something real, but the simulacrum of something real through which it gathers and galvanizes all of our attention into something that is essentially not real. And and of course, this is the age of television and all of that. But I think it holds, right? Because I think we're living in the downstream logic and the perfection of that insight. in 1961. So anyway, I recommend that because the look at some point reality will radically reassert itself, and and and
It
and,
has
and I
to.
and I do take some grim um, solace in that, that we can only live so far away from the source. And of course, this has implications for us as Christians
Sure.
too, right? But if we're just sort of talking about, the thisness, that things can only exist so far away from the source before it just gets snipped off and it just floats off into outer space.
The
And
question,
yeah.
the question though would be to return us to our beginning, which is maybe how we can end, which is,
Mm.
uh,
You've been trying to land
it,
this plane for a
I
while now.
know.
no, I'm
We
not. No,
have Mike.
I'm just concerned about you guys. I could sit here for 3 hours, talk to you guys. That's fine by me. But I just I get the sense that all optimism, the reason why I'm not optimistic
Mhm.
is that in AI, we're talking about something over which we will eventually lose control.
Yeah.
So, Kale, you talk about, okay, we'll reach a certain point. There'll be a turning point where we'll come to our senses and we'll step back and we'll say, no, 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 we're not going to build any new, as Bernie Sanders is now proposing a moratorium on data centers. Hey, by the way, it's to go back to the Truman Show, right? And we'll come back to my point in a second. Is it in? Is anybody surprised that Bill Gates is suddenly no longer concerned with climate change?
Yeah.
Where he
Yeah.
came out like 3 months ago and says, "Oh, that was all exaggerated." The reason is he's now into AI, and he
Yeah.
realizes AI is going to need data centers, and data centers need freaking 10 nuclear reactors per
Yeah.
data center just to provide them with the energy that they need. Which is why Bernie Sanders is saying, "Let's stop building these things because the consumer is getting soaked with high electric bills because they're building all these AI data centers." So my point would be, okay, good on Bernie Sanders,
Mhm.
but the data centers are going to get built. There's an
Yeah.
inevitability to
Yeah.
it. It's the technological imperative, or what? Because if we don't build them, then the Chinese will be building them, and so we have to outdo the Chinese. So there's a sense in which I'm not optimistic because there's a sense in which things will spin out of our control, like the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, that once there was a point of no return, you could hit AZ-5 and all you're going to do is blow the thing up because you don't understand the flaw in the system with the
Right.
graphite tips and so on.
Yeah.
We don't even begin to understand the graphite tips of AI, and that our AZ-5 button might actually might actually blow us all up. That's my concern.
Yeah, no, I think that's real. I think that's very real. Yeah, and the untethered prediction that I'm making is not, oh, good. It's just like this is where it's going. And if you again, a last recommendation that I'll make for the audience is there was a fantastic conversation on a very big YouTube channel called Diary of a CEO. I forget the fellow's name. He's an English guy, but he had a conversation with this fellow by the name of Tristan Harris, who was responsible for the Social Network Dilemma documentary that was on Netflix about 5 years ago. It was pre-AI, but really kind of talking about the algorithms. Anyway, he had a recent conversation last week with him that I highly recommend, and he specifically talks about this like hope versus optimism versus in the ratchet of inevitability. So I highly recommend it. Diary of a CEO. Tristan Harris is the guest.
That's great. That's a great recommendation.
Hmm.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just be very brief. The technological imperative is real, and I think
Hmm.
what we need to try and do. A lot of what my work is about is trying to understand why the technological imperative is imperative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Why is it imperative? That's true. And American pragmatism only compounds ideologically and philosophically
That's
that
right.
imperative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a moralistic response to it is not adequate.
Hmm.
It's not. It's
Wow.
certainly not enough to arrest it. It hasn't
Right.
done.
Right.
And I will add to that there's never been a major technological achievement ever in human history that wasn't eventually weaponized and used in war.
Right.
And the CEO, or the not the CEO, the MIT guy, Kale, I can't remember his name, who came out and said flee to the hills. The doomsday is around the corner because AI is going to kill us all who had been involved in developing AI.
Yeah.
This is the point he was making, is that our competition with the Chinese, the new Cold War with the Chinese, is precisely what's going to drive trillions of dollars of dark money coming from our government into factories that are secretly working on AI for military purposes.
Right. Right.
That are going to be unbelievably that's going to make nuclear weapons look like child's play in
Right.
comparison.
Because nuclear weapons can't create nuclear weapons.
That's right.
AIs, advanced AIs can create more advanced AIs. At least that's the idea. And we should be very concerned about that. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I mentioned that simply to go on what Mike was saying about the technological imperative, and it's not just, I would say it's not just, and I added American pragmatism.
Mm.
It's the technological imperative, American pragmatism, and the inevitable competition that modern political conflict gives rise to. Uh, and I said when we want to land this plane, as Mike says, but there's this deep question in the American soul, or this deep imperative in the American soul, where we have to be number one in everything.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I would say, so what if the Chinese have more aircraft carriers than we do? They don't yet, but maybe they will someday. So what if the Chinese have a better economy than we have? So what? So what if we're the second biggest economy in the world? What if we're the second best military in the world? Why? In other words, the constant, going back to the Truman Show analogy, the constant necessity of creating boogeymen
Yeah.
for the sake of feeding this beast
Yeah.
is endless. Is endless. We vanquished the Soviet Union. Oh, we've got Russia meddling around in Ukraine, but geez, how dangerous are the Russians when they can't even defeat Ukraine? All right, so now we've pivoted. Oh, it's the Chinese. The
Mhm.
Chinese are the people that are going to take over the entire world. I'm not here to whitewash the Chinese,
Yeah.
but President Xi could die tomorrow of a stroke, and then all of a sudden you've got a change in Chinese leadership. This sense of Chinese inevitable conquest of America if we don't build AI in space and so on. This, to me, is part of the Truman Show narrative, the boogeyman creation, that really scares the bejeebers out of me.
My last bit on that point, Weston, the sort of the arch villain of Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra in C.S. Lewis's The Ransom trilogy, proclaims to Ransom at one point, "We have time and space in our fingertips." And like that's the great, we will be as gods. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's Lucifer and Luciferian at its core. And that's of course the great promise. It's what you talked about earlier, Mike, in terms of the sort of the Boromir paradigm. And that will continue to animate us because we seem unable to talk ourselves off of that cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Boromir was a character, Lord of the Rings, a human, not an elf or a dwarf or a
Yeah.
hobbit, who was seduced by the power of the ring and wanted to. He thought that it was just a tool that we could use.
That's right. That's right.
But but eventually he dies in the cause of defending the hobbits. So
Yeah.
he redeems himself.
That's right.
So that's the Boromir effect.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mike, do you have any last words?
Merry Christmas.
Same, same to you and yours, Mike. Same to
Yeah,
you
I
and
mean, I
yours.
think
Well, when you say that, I'm reminded of the Saturday Night Live character Gilda Radner, Emily Litella, would misunderstand it, and then she'd be corrected, and then she would say, "Oh, that's different then. Never
That's
mind."
Never mind. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
now that you say Merry Christmas, perhaps never mind
Yeah, no, no,
about
no.
AI.
I think there are lots of things that could be said, right? And they just because this problem seems to be bottomless, and the future is indeterminate. And I think I've been about as bleak as I need to be as far as my optimism is concerned. I maybe I can say something hopeful, and Kale's earlier point about the intractability, right, of nature of the gift of being. The one thing that presumably is beyond our power is to to revoke uh, God's gift of reality to us. That all of our attempts to destroy it or undermine it or do violence upon it presuppose it. The good remains, and the goodness of things of the world remains the presupposition of everything we do to it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that's a
Yeah.
And Kale made the point earlier that hope and optimism are not the same thing. I think a real trust in that and in the providential ordering of that is the basis from which one can uh, uh, peer over into the edge of the abyss without losing your mind. And
Yeah.
I think that's we have to work hard not to do that.
That's right.
I know that we're trying to wind this down, but I'm reminded, but what both of you are saying is so profound. I'm reminded, I'm a Trekkie. Remember an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where Picard is taken prisoner by the Cardassians, Captain Picard. And through various tortures and deprivations, they're trying to break down his mind. And at one point, they put flash 4 lights in front of him.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get him to say that there are 5 lights.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just say 5 lights and all this torture will go away. At the end, he is saved through negotiations and so forth. But before he leaves, he turns to the Cardassian and he goes, "There are 4 lights." All right. In Defiance. All right. And I think what you're talking about there, Mike, and Kale too, that perhaps and a lot of people are probably wondering, well, what's the answer? May not be an answer other than to say, to continue to adhere to common sense, to adhere to the truth, and to be witnesses to simple common sense truth. So when somebody says, who's got a beard and a penis, my name is Tanya, say, no, there are 4 lights, not 5.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is for all of his flaws, this is the glory of Jordan Peterson, where he said to the Canadian government, there are 4 lights, not 5. And he's paid the price for it. And I think that's our role as Christians now, to look our torturers in the eye and say, no, there are 4 lights and not 5.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's so good. That's great.
Anyway, do you have anybody have any last comments before we sign off?
That's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
All right, guys. And thanks for listening, everyone. I thought this was like I said, this was just an excuse to get Kale and Mike Hanby together, and they did not disappoint. I hope I didn't intrude too much with my stupid ramblings. But anyway,
it's great.
Thanks, everyone. And everyone have a Merry Christmas, because I don't think I'll be having another podcast till then. All right. Bye now.